there's a Mei Hashiloach in P'rashat Beraishit, which is like, it usually blows everyone's mind, and it actually is connected to how I view normative behavior. In other words, how I view law. Okay? But he doesn't talk about it directly, but we'll see. Right? That's the first piece I want to do here. Okay? Vayitzav Hashem Elokim al ha'adam לאמר mikol eitz hagan achol tochal ומעץ הדעת טוב ורע לא תאכל. Okay, that's the pasuk. Okay, לעתיד כשיתוקן חטא האדם הראשון, אז יהיה צירוף הפסוקים מכל עץ הגן אכול תאכל ומעץ הדעת טוב. ואחרי זה ורע לא תאכל. Okay, היינו. So what does it mean? This is, this goes based on the Ramban, right? The Ramban's thing that in the Ramban is Hakdama to Sefer Beraishit. He says that the whole Torah is Eish Choral Gabe Eish Levana, and it could be divided up. The letters can be divided up to form different psukim and different words, right? That's what's called the Torah Hakduma, the primordial Torah. But the Torah, the way it expresses itself in our world, is the way it's broken up into the psukim and the words that we have, right? So what he's saying, he's giving you an alternative reading by ending a pasuk at doing a psik at a different place, which is justified because there's a reading of the Torah for Olam Hazeh, and there's a reading of the Torah, Liyamot HaMashiach, is going to be a different reading of the Torah. It's the same Torah, it's just going to be read differently, right? So he's within normative, you could call normative hermeneutics, right? B'chol zot, right? If you go by the Ramban. So what is he saying here? He says, looking at it from the present, from Adam HaRishon's perspective, it said, when he read the Torah, in a sense, it said, Mikol eitz hagan ochol tochel, ume'etz hadat tov hara lo tochel. That's the pasuk. But after the end of history, and we look back at what happened, we'll read the pasuk differently, and we'll see what the ramifications are. Mikol eitz hagan ochol tochel, ume'etz hadat tov. ואחרי זה ורע לא תאכל, היינו הטוב שבהאילן יאכל. רק הרע לא יאכל. Okay? In other words, there is, the Nachash was right in a certain sense, that there's good in this tree that you should partake of. Okay? So just the bad, so what the Nachash, he's not saying that here, what the Nachash managed to convince Chava, or the Isha, but she's not Chava yet, right? What he managed to convince Chava is that you can take the good without taking the bad, right? It's the Eitz Hadat Tov Hara, but you know what? God is a Yiddish Imam, he doesn't want you to take a chance. So he's telling you don't eat the tree, but really there's so much good in this tree that if you actually eat the fruit, and you take the good out, and you don't take the ra, you'll be on a higher place than you would have been, right? It means, you hear very often, live up to the challenge. Okay, it's risky. Life is risky, so, but you gain much more by engaging, and of course you might eat the ra also, but look at the possible gain. That sounds like not a bad argument, right? So it's good enough that was the winning argument of the day, right? So, but afterward, so the Nachash is wrong in the present, but looking back, he's right. This is fascinating, right? Vashem yitbarach yברר ki lo achal rak hatov והחטא lo haya rak lefi da'ato כקליפות השום יותר. Let me explain this. Okay? He says that let's look at it this way. Let's say you have a mashber in your life, right? Some mashber. It could be a very severe mashber. So, you get divorced, you lose a job, whatever, things happen, right? So, at the time, it really seems bad. But then, if things can work themselves out in such a way that looking back at it, you say, you know what? I don't know what I was thinking when I thought that was so bad. That was the best thing that ever happened to me, right? Now, it's not always like that. Life does not always turn out that way. But you do have that phenomena that looking forward, it's bad. But looking backward, there's a reinterpretation of what happened. Nothing changed objectively. You still had that job, and then you didn't have the job. That was an objective fact, right? But looking back, the significance that you give to the events change, and they can be opposite. Right? So that's what he's describing here in a sense. In the mitziut of olam hazeh, it was a chet. But looking back at the end, so what happened at the end? So there was all of human history in between, right? And there was this process of what he would say, based on, it's not just him, based on the Arizal, right? There's this process of tikkun that occurs, that took all of history to work itself out. So as at the end, you really are in a better place than you would have been. When it happened, you didn't think so. So there are different, what happens is there are different levels of reality. There's the reality of olam hazeh, where the chet is a chet. Right? But there's a different reality looking back. I'm not calling it olam haba, means like when, after you die. It doesn't mean that. It's like in the eschaton, right? In Yemot HaMashiach, right? In the other, right? The world afterwards. Then you'd say, you know what? They really only good came from it at the end. But my experience of it as being bad, he says, is lo hayarak lefi da'ato, according to his subjective understanding. Da'ato is da'at ha'adam. Keklipat hashum v'lo יותר. It was an illusion. It was just the way there's a veil which veils over reality. So there was a veil that made me think that it was bad, but in fact it was good. So at the end of days, the veil is lifted, and I see the true reality, and I see that it was all part of the divine plan. God will make it clear, and God will make it so, because at the end of the day, it's all the will of God. So in the klipat hashum, in this world of illusion which is veiled, there seems to be chet and onesh, and there's a free will, and I decided to do something against the will of God. But in reality, it's all part of the will of God. So I see that at the end, that it was all for the good, and what seemed to be evil really turned out to be good. To say this, it's one thing to say it when you talk about things like losing your job, right? It's another thing to say it when you talk about, family getting killed in a car accident. You would never look back and say that was the best thing that ever happened to me and I started again, right? You wouldn't say that, right? So it's not such an easy thing to say all the time. He says elsewhere, to just give you an example, his model for what geula is he gives a mashal, it's the mashal of Yosef. When Yosef masqueraded as the Ish Mitzri, I don't know if I mentioned this one to you, right? So Yosef seems to the brothers to be an Ish Mitzri. Right? He's this prime minister who's giving them a very hard time. He wants to subjugate them, and their lives are at risk, and their future is at stake, and it's all in the hands of this obnoxious, unsympathetic, suspicious viceroy, right? But then he reveals himself as Yosef. Now when he says, Ani Yosef, so that's a Yeshua, right? So they've been saved. But what type of Yeshua is it? The Yeshua is, nothing changed. It's still the same human being that's standing there. But their understanding of the situation changed. Right? So where did the Ish Mitzri go? Right? When he said, Ani Yosef. He just evaporated. Right? So now I have to reinterpret everything lemafreya, retroactively. Oh, so there was never an Ish Mitzri. So now I understand everything that happened as Yosef doing it. So that's a major reinterpretation of the whole story. It's for them, they have to go back and reinterpret their own history. Right? So that is the same sort of thing. That when they're in it, there's the Ish Mitzri. It seems to be real, but it's not. And when the reality is unveiled, it gives me a new interpretation from the very beginning. So the reality on the cosmic level is unveiled at the end. And then I reinterpret everything. That's, in a sense, that's how he would read tshuva also, of chovot nasim lo schuyot. It's not that the chovot, the zdonot nasot kishgagot, right? That's just I let you off the hook, right? The zdonot nasot schuyot means a total reinterpretation of what happened. And that's what he's describing here. Okay? So that, in a sense, takes away. Means on one level, there's Torah mitzvot, there's isurim, right? What is the paradigmatic isur? Is the isur to eat from the hadad. That's the first isur, right? So there are isurim, but the isurim, in a sense, the whole Torah of isur v'heter is, what he's saying here is keklipat hashum. It's a veiled reality. Very not Litvish. You could see why Litvaks wouldn't like this, right? The Torah mitzvah is the ultimate reality. He's saying Torah mitzvot, the way you understand it now, he's not saying there's no Torah, right? But the Torah mitzvot, the isser to eat from the hadad, which is the isser, right? The first isser, right? That isser, you will understand it in a different way one day, and it's not the ultimate reality. There's a different way of reading the Torah. You can say, hadad tov, period. V'ra lo tochel, v'lo achal mehara. It seemed that he was eating from the ra, but it was all tov. You see? So the different levels of reality. There's one reality. It means, as far as what I'm interested in deriving from this is what I can get from the nature of halacha. Okay? There's a lot of other things going on here. Right? But in terms of the nature of halacha, he's saying that isser v'heter is something which in olam hazeh you have to live by, but at the same time he's letting you in on a secret that he shouldn't be letting you in on, right, in a sense, that it's not the ultimate reality. You have to treat it as if it's the ultimate reality, but on the back of your mind you know that it's not the ultimate reality because it will be interpreted otherwise, and in the end there won't be any isser v'heter. So the question is, why write about it if it's, right? So apparently he thinks that it does reflect back somehow on how we do relate to the Torah mitzvot and to halacha today. Whereas he himself, he was not a Frankist and he was not a Sabbatean. Right? He kept the halacha. He kept it rigorously. But he felt informed by the fact that it's b'chol zeh not the ultimate reality. And that means that there's room for other types of values to come into play when you decide what your normative behavior should be. What should the halacha be? And that's directly relevant to the type of things we're talking about. We talk about gittin and kiddushin and kinyanim. When I say, I'm okay, I'm not okay, right? That's what I'm not just saying it, right? Whereas there is the reality of the halacha, which we're mostly discussing when you do the sugyot, right? But there's another reality which, at the end, right, that transcends that, and that at the end somehow should informs the present. So it doesn't mean you can throw away the halacha in the present, but it means that your values can be informed by something which is not halachic, and that can be brought in to the halachic decision-making process, and that can actually change the outcome in certain cases. Right? Exactly. What it can change that, so that already you get into very, very sticky territory. But in principle, there's that possibility, right? So what we have to do, part of what we're doing here, is to keep that in mind and to try to see what we can do with that. And that's why we had the whole discussion about last week about Tzvi Zohar's article, right? Because of this certain openness to, there are certain problems here, there's certain issues here, there are values here which we believe to be central to, and which we believe to be true. And they become part of the chulent of what goes into our decision-making process. It's not only the Tosot and the Gemara and the Rambam, but there's a value here. There's a value of equality. There's a value of loving relations between spouses, between how we see relationships today, that they didn't see relationships that way before. It's not even a question of a value judgment that it's better or worse. It's different. So those differences have to be brought into consideration. If you think that the halakha is the ultimate, so then there's no room for considerations like that. Right? The moment you say, okay, the halakha is the halakha, but it's not the ultimate reality, there's another reality, so that informs me that I can inject other considerations even in the present. Because otherwise there's no sense in writing this at all. Okay?
You're assuming, though, that when you say halakha, you're relating to it as a given past. And like now, in the future, like now or present, or in the future, we can apply new values, principles, whatever, and then like retrofit it.
Yeah.
But I always saw like halakha as an ongoing process that keeps walking.
Yeah.
And
so I'll tell you what I think about that. Yeah, you want to finish your sentence?
No, you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying. So I think that what I'm saying was always true, okay? But it wasn't consciously true. It was clear that people who were interpreting the halakha were informed by whatever values they had and they absorbed from the civilization around them. But it wasn't conscious. They just assumed so. They didn't have... In postmodernity, we're conscious of the subjective nature of our perceptions. Right? That we know that our civilization sees in certain ways. We have a certain historical consciousness that they didn't have in the Middle Ages, and they certainly didn't have in the time of Chazal.
Post-Enlightenment.
Post-Enlightenment, right? It starts with post-modernity. In other words, it starts with Descartes. Moving out of the Middle Ages, where all of a sudden we realize that there's a role in me in what I perceive. It's not that there's some objective reality that I'm perceiving, that the reality that I perceive is a construct, which is, depending on exactly how you formulate it, that's the big machlokes, right? Is a construct of where my sense perceptions meets with whatever is out there. Together that forms reality. That would be Kant, right? So there's an acknowledgement that I'm part of the I create the reality also, or I at least have a part in the creation of that reality. So I'm conscious of that now, but I didn't think that, they didn't think that a few hundred years ago. So it was true always, but now I'm aware of it. So now it can be formulated. And now it says we ate from the Hadad, literally, right? We ate from the Hadad. So you can't climb back into your mother's womb and make believe you don't know this, right? So now we know that people always had agendas. And sometimes they're expressed explicitly, and sometimes they're not. Right? So today we can say, look, we have an agenda. We don't want there to be any agunot. That's an agenda. Now I'm going to say, okay, how am I going to figure that out? Okay, so I know that Chazal also thought that. So, but they didn't say, in the end, I want nothing, I don't want any agunot. But they said, ein echad is ne'eman, and da-da-da, right? So we can say, you know what, we'll use afkeinu. Or we'll use mekach ta'ut. Right? And I'm saying b'ferush because I want to be honest, right? The reason I'm doing that is because I want this outcome. I want the outcome. Zev Farber wrote a very nice article called "No Aguna Left Behind." Right? That the outcome is there are no agunot left behind. Not that there's one or two that I can't work out. That I come to and I say I'm going to work out everybody. Right? But I have to do it with the halachic process. But I can do it with the halachic process. Right? And I'll stretch it. Until I get it done. Right? Okay, so that's sort of the underlying assumption that emerges from here. If I want to know what do you think about halacha or normative behavior, then in the end we understand it all differently, means that the way you understand it now is not ultimate. And that means that it's more flexible than you think. Okay? Okay, let's take a look at the last Mei Hashiloach, the third Mei Hashiloach here. This is a short one also. It's also connected to this. This is in Pashas Lekh, lekha. Okay? El ha'aretz asher eka. Ki Avram Avinu alav hashalom haya godel tשוקתו לידע מקום דבקות חיותו אצל השם יתברך. Avram Avinu was a passionate person. Okay? You can see that, I think, from Shat. Certainly the way Chazal paint him in terms of his willingness to sacrifice himself for God and the Kivshana Eish. But even if you don't take the Chazal, but he follows God and he goes to war to save his kin. He's a person who's active and caring. Okay? So he says that his main desire was ladat makom dvekut chiyuto etzel Hashem yitbarach. He wanted to get to the bottom of his own existence. That's what he was looking for. Okay? Ad hichan magia. There's this God out there, and there's me in here, and I'm reaching out to God. How far can I go? Is there a place where my being actually meets God someplace? Is there a nikudah? That's the way the Sfas Emes would put it. Is there a point of meeting? How deep can I go into myself to find God? Va'amar lo Hashem yitbarach el haaretz asher arecha. What does that mean? Haynu dvekutcha hi b'makom hanikra. This is very beautiful. Quote asher arecha. How far does it go? Asher arecha. What is asher arecha? It's open-ended. Ki ein lo sof. B'chol pam yitrabelecha yoter v'yoter ha'arot ha'ein sof baruch hu. V'zot timtza be'eretz Yisrael. So Eretz Yisrael is a symbol for him, for something which is constantly developing. Eretz Yisrael is always ha'aretz asher arecha. And in a sense, it has to be that way. Because if God is infinite, so how can you ever get to the bottom of it? You're looking for God in yourself, right? You're looking for makom vekut chiyuto etzel Hashem yitbarach. You want to find where in yourself do you meet God. So the answer is never and always, right? Right. The answer is that it's Ein Sof. So there's no end to the journey. So it's always El Haaretz Asher Arecha. Right? The journey, the spiritual journey, going to Eretz. This is already Rav Breuer, right? It's going to go totally different, right? From the Mei Hashiloach to Rav Mordechai Breuer, Alav Shalom. Right? So he talks about Avraham Avinu taking two journeys. There's the journey that he takes with Terach. Right? Terach embarks upon going to Eretz Canaan before Lekh, lekha. Isn't that the Parshas Noach? That's a physical journey. Right? And that he goes with Ishtov, Nefesh Asu B'Charan, and all the Pekalach, everything. Right? That's a physical journey to Eretz Canaan, to a known destination. That's one journey. Look, it's Meduyak in the Psukim. Right? That's one journey. And then there's another journey of Lekh lekha me'aretz chamlatcha beit avicha el haaretz asher arecha. It's not the same as Eretz Canaan. We don't know that it's Eretz Canaan. Maybe it is Eretz Canaan. Maybe it's not. But it has a different nature. It's El Haaretz Asher Arecha. And when he departs Haaretz Asher Arecha, he doesn't go with the Nefesh Asu B'Charan, the Ishto, etc. He just goes with Lot, because Lot at that point is his spiritual companion. But that's it. And there it says, Kasher Tziva Hashem, or Kasher Amar Hashem. Okay? So the spiritual journey of Kasher Amar Hashem is El Haaretz Asher Arecha. There's no end to that journey. So that's what he's saying here. Now what this does, again, it introduces into the spiritual journey the Ein Sofiyut, which in order to capture the Ein Sofiyut, it has to be not distinct. It can't be Eretz Canaan. It has to be El Haaretz Asher Arecha. It means it has to be not certain and not clear. Right? And that means that a person has to have humility in the spiritual journey, because I don't know exactly where I'm going. I don't have it all figured out, right? All figured out is going to Eretz Canaan. That's not a spiritual journey. It's important to know where you're going. You got to get to work in the morning. You have to know where you're going, right? You have to have a plan, right? But the spiritual journey that Avraham Avinu embarks on is infinite. So you don't exactly know where you're going. So I may think I'm going here, and I wind up going there, and I have to go down to Eretz Mitzrayim, and I have to come back, and then I have to go to Avimelech and Plishtim, right? I don't know where it's taking me, right? So that's because God is infinite. If God is infinite, He's taking you with Him, so the journey is always uncertain. And that means humility. And that means saying there are things here I don't understand. That means saying It might be this way now, but there might be other things later. Right? It opens you up to the same type of thing that we're talking about. Okay? All right, I think we'll...
Thank you.
Okay, we'll stop here. Okay? If you have a chance, you should take a look at this. I hope to be able to write about this. I want to write about this middle piece for this Shabbos. I just started. I hope I get it out. But you should... This middle piece of Lekh, lekha, the longer piece, is one of the most important pieces in the Mei Hashiloach, and it's right out of the Indian Upanishads. I'll write that also. The Lekh lekha is Lekh el atzmecha. That's it. That's the punchline. Mm-hmm. But the way he develops it is very powerful. Because the journey is how do you search for God? What are you looking for? Where are you looking for Him? Right? So as I'm looking in all the wrong places, and God tells me, no, you're looking in the wrong places. Right? Just look inside. You're looking in history. You're looking in all these things. The way, like, if I say, why do you believe in God? Oh, I believe in God because the state of Israel. I believe in God. People believe in God, all sorts of things. Right? No, just look inside. Right? I believe in God because of the Bible codes. Right? No, just look inside. But the way he describes it, so it's very, very powerful. And it has to do with the source of faith and where God is, in fact. That's why this is very important. But since we don't have enough time to flesh it out, we'll stop here. Okay? All right.